What is up, guys? Well, it's a couple of days after I normally like to drop this video, but it's time to rank all of the new release films that I saw in November of 2024, of which I was able to check out 11 new releases. As always, give me your rankings down below. Let me know which new films you checked out, which ones you liked the most, maybe the ones that you didn't really care for so much. And then we got one more of these videos left at the end of this month, and then we get into all of the best of the year, worst of the year, all those big, gigantic, fat-ass rankings, culminating with me ranking every single new release that I saw in 2024, which I still don't even know how many movies that's going to be, but it's going to be a lot. Also, quickly before we get into the ranking, I want to remind you guys that I have relaunched my merch store just about a month or so ago. We got brand new designs. We got brand new Carnage Candy designs that dropped on Black Friday. There's hats, t-shirts, crew necks, hoodies, mugs, stickers, all kinds of stuff. Just go to shopcodyleach.com or click the link in the video description. There's also a little shelf down here that YouTube integrates. Please check all that out, and if you do buy any merch, of course, I appreciate it. You are contributing financially to this channel, and send me a picture if you buy anything with you wearing this merch. So, thank you for that, and now, let's get into the ranking. Coming in at number 11 is not only the worst film that I saw in November, it's likely to be one of the 10 worst films that I see in this calendar year. And as much as it felt like this movie didn't have a shot at offending me on this level, it's genuinely one of the worst holiday films I have ever seen. And it's not Red One, it's Dear Santa. This is a film that was not on my radar until my wife got a hold of it. It was a premiere on Paramount Plus, and the only reason that she had any interest in it, aside from the fact that we both love Jack Black, is because she heard that Post Malone is going to be involved with this movie in some way. My wife is an unashamed Post Malone fanatic. She has already seen him twice this calendar year, one of which I took her to. So, yeah, we sat down to watch this film, and I figured, okay, a holiday movie released straight to streaming where they're marketing it based off of Post Malone showing up in it, probably not going to be great, but it'll be okay. It'll be a passable 90 minutes or so. And my God, did I underestimate the powers of Dear Santa. I'm not exaggerating when I tell you that, like, literally every element of this movie fails. It's not directed well. It's certainly not written well. The comedy is awful. It's cringeworthy. Nothing about it made me laugh, smile, chuckle, any of it. Jack Black looks extremely bored. It looks like they gave him just nothing to work with in this script. And so they just said, just do the Jack Black thing. Like, read this dialogue in your Jack Black voice. And so you just have scenes where he's, hey, man, yeah, that was my pleasure. Ooh, like, he's just doing the Jack Black exaggerated thing the whole time, which it takes a lot to make me not enjoy Jack Black, but goddamn if they didn't do it. You have the kid actors here, which I don't like picking on kid actors, but they're all terrible, especially the one that's leading this movie. I mean, all of their lines feel like they're reading them off of cue cards. The way that it's edited, like, there's segments where, like, the pause between their line reading is almost frustrating because you know, like, it's not supposed to linger this long, and this is the editor's job. What is he doing? You have the premise of the film could have been fun, but, like, the wishes themselves are very inconsequential, and the thing drags like a son of a bitch. Like, you get to the point of the movie where it feels like we're going to be starting to wrap up, and I've already just exhausted my patience, and so I looked at my phone, and I'm like, oh my God, we have 45 minutes left. And then, as if that's not bad enough, just like a cringeworthy bad attempt at a holiday, somewhat crass comedy is bad enough. In the last 40 minutes of this movie, out of fucking nowhere, they drop this extremely dark and dramatic element into it regarding the main character's little brother that they gave no hints, like barely any hints towards. It's something that should have been introduced in the first act of the film. Throwing it in right before the third act starts just puts this gigantic sour note on a movie that's already souring pretty much everybody that watches it. It's just baffling. It's just like, who the hell wrote this? And then shockingly, you find out this is written and directed by the Farrelly brothers. Yes, the minds that brought you Dumb and Dumber, and There's Something About Mary, and Me, Myself, and Irene, and a couple other good ones that I think are underrated. This is written by Peter Farrelly, who's the one who directed Green Book, that won Best Picture, and it's directed by Bobby Farrelly. What the fuck? Like, I hope they got a good paycheck. Like, I hope this was just like a weekend job for them or something. Like, the fact that their names were on it, I was like, oh, cool. I didn't know that they were doing this. This is going to be probably pretty funny. It's the worst thing I've ever seen them do. So you have all of that, and even the way that the movie tries to wrap up with like the reveals about the devil and him actually kind of being halfway of a good guy by the end of it feels odd. And I'm not somebody to get offended by this, but I can only imagine any Christians that are watching this, that this movie is just absolutely sacrilegious. Like having a Christmas film, a film based around the holiday of Jesus's birth, and the devil is kind of the good guy. Like, okay, that's a choice. So yeah, Dear Santa, like it at worst, or excuse me, at best, it's a absolutely forgettable Paramount Plus exclusive that's really not worth your time. But at its worst, I genuinely think it's one of the most awful holiday movies that I've ever seen. And it's inevitably going to be very, very low on my end of the year list. And as if that wasn't fun enough, following right along suit is number 10, which is Nutcrackers. And this is a Hulu exclusive holiday comedy, also starring a comedy legend, Ben Stiller, also directed by somebody that should know better and has a much better track record of films, not so much lately, but overall, this is directed by David Gordon Green. And I could barely finish this movie, which made me toy with the notion of putting it underneath 11, but I feel like 11 was just much more offensive. Dear Santa was more offensive to me than this one was. You have a movie with Ben Stiller where his sister's kids or something like that, they are orphaned. And it's a situation where the family that was arranged for them fell through. And so he essentially has to be like their guardian for a weekend while the social worker finds another place to place these kids. And they're the biggest assholes ever, which is a trope that I hate in movies, having little kids just be little fuckers for the sake of it. Sometimes that can be charming and funny. When you go too far with it, I hate them. So you have Ben Stiller, who's a fairly well-meaning guy, who is just literally being tortured mentally and physically by these asshole fucker little kids for an entire film. And so it's not enjoyable, it's not funny, it's not charming in any way, and it makes Ben Stiller look like a fucking idiot. Like there's literally a point where he's looking for a cell phone signal, and they're like, take this paddleboard and ride it out into the middle of this freezing cold lake. I promise you, there's a signal out there. And he fucking does it. And it's like, did you not see where this was going? Like, this is literally like a mouse trap that you walked into and bit right down on the cheese. So it's just all of those stupid physical gags that don't get a laugh out of me whatsoever. But the worst thing about it beyond that is just like Ben Stiller, much like Jack Black in the previous entry, feels like he's bored. It feels like there's not really any reason for him to be there. It's probably just a paycheck. There's not really any writing that suits his comedy chops. He's not able to really even do any kind of ad-libbing to bring something to the film. He's just a stand-in. He's a hired gun to play, to put on the poster, to give it some sort of legitimacy. But the part that just it bugged me the most is that about 20 minutes in, I'd already pretty much exhausted my patience. I watched this a day after Dear Santa, so I had very little left. And I'm just kind of over shitty streaming movies and even more so shitty streaming holiday films because we had plenty last year too. 20 minutes in, I paused this film and I'm like, okay, let me guess. Ben Stiller and these kids are going to be at odds with each other for the first 2 acts, but then something's going to happen. It's going to pull on his heartstrings a little bit, probably having to do with his sister and memories of his sister. And he's going to start to endear himself to these little prick kids. And he's going to decide that he wants to be the full-time guardian of them. And then you got Linda Cardellini here as the social worker. And I've only seen one scene with them, but I guarantee there's probably going to be some kind of a romantic edge with them. And he's probably going to love her. And they're all going to live together as a big fucking happy asshole family. Tell me that's not what happens, right? And then you watch the film and it's like, oh, I'm not trying to say I'm a psychic, but that was pretty fucking good. So yeah, not nearly as offensive as Dear Santa, but equally as useless. So don't waste your time with it. Spend the holidays with your family watching a lot of the other proven holiday classics, not this shit. Coming in at number 9 is an independent horror film called Wineville, which was not on my radar. I had not heard of this film, but about 3 weeks ago or so, the director, I think she's also a producer, and the star of the film, Brandy Roderick, reached out to me on Instagram and Twitter and wanted to know if I wanted a screener to check this thing out. And I had a chance to check it out last night as kind of a last-minute addition to this list. So Wineville is a story of this mom and her son where she is called back to this like winery house, this winery property that she lived her childhood in, that she has a lot of skeletons in the closet for, that her parents have died and she has to figure out basically what to do with this land, what's going to happen to it, if she's going to sell it or or whatever. And some eerie, creepy things start to happen when she is there. There's two people that run the winery that are very clearly fucked in the head. And so it's a very low budget, I would say almost like a slasher film, but there's not like a constant pursuit where people are getting killed left and right. It's got kills in it. It's dark. It's got some gore. And what I will say is, this is very clearly a film that was working with a very low budget. And when I see a film like that, I always try to keep that into account, especially when ranking it alongside movies that have sometimes $100, $200, $300 million budgets. And with the low budget here, I think they do a pretty good job with some of the direction and the lighting, and especially with some of the gore. You do have some pretty gnarly kills in here. And I think that the gore, for being practical, was pretty good. That's something that you don't see a lot of. Sometimes they go very easily with the CGI gore, and I appreciated the fact that they kept that practical. Beyond that, though, I didn't really enjoy this movie. And a lot of it just had to do with the fact that it's dealing with subject matter that I have a hard time getting any sort of entertainment out of. This is, since Wrong Turn 2, Wrong Turn 6, this is the movie that is most focused on like incest horror that I've ever seen. You have these skeletons in the past regarding this sexual abuse that she used to have with her father, and other things start to happen with the evil characters that lean right into that, like multiple times. So at 3 or 4 points in the film, it just goes back to that being the main source of your thrills and your tension and your horror. And it's such a gross subject that it just turned me off. So aside from that, I mean, it's a movie that there's not a whole lot going on. You can kind of see through where some of the twists and turns are going to come from. So it's a low budget movie. If you want another horror film to round out your list for the year, give it a shot. Like I said, it is working with a low budget. I do think that they pull off some things well, but narratively, didn't really enjoy what they were going for. It turned me off, I gotta be honest. Coming in at number 8 is a movie I actually saw over a year ago at Fantastic Fest 2023, and that is 100 Yards. And this is a film that is like a period piece martial arts film. I don't remember specifically what the story of it is. I know it had to do with like this martial arts academy and this guy trying to prove himself for it. And there's some impressive martial arts going on. I think that if you're a historian and you're really into Chinese history, there's a lot in here that you'll enjoy. I am not. So there was a lot that just went over my head here. I did not understand a lot of the references. A lot of it expects you to be somewhat in the know of Chinese history, of Chinese customs and culture, and I'm just anything but that. So really, aside from the fight scenes that I thought were pretty well done, this movie was really at arm's distance for me, if not even further. And so when I ended up ranking all the films that I saw at the festival 2023, I think this was either in last place or maybe one above last place. So wasn't really something that I was overly fond of, but that's just because it's not made for me. It's well done, so if it interests you, check it out, because it's just now getting released. Coming in at number 7 was absolutely the punching bag of November 2024, and even a few months before that, and that is Red One. Now, this is a movie that when it was released, I mean, even before release, a lot of people were already ready to call this thing one of the worst blockbusters of all time, and the example of what is wrong with Hollywood, and absolute bomb and a failure. And it, in fact, did end up bombing, but I didn't feel like it actually earned the level of disdain that was hailed at it. It's certainly representative of some issues. It's certainly overbloated with its budget. It certainly raises questions about where the hell that $250 million went, because I don't really see it on screen. And the fact that $50 million of it reportedly went into The Rock's pocket, a little bit odd. You start to get those narratives about is Hollywood money laundering within their own movies. We get all these stories about how Hollywood's dying and Hollywood's struggling, and then they spend $250 million on this. So there's absolutely issues to be taken. There's absolutely conversations that should be had. But judging the movie purely on itself, I thought it was fine. I think I gave it 3 out of 5. It was a perfectly suitable, big budget, flashy, modern blockbuster style holiday film. I had significantly more fun with this than I had with either Dear Santa or Nutcrackers. You can combine them and it's still miles ahead of those, which I don't know if that's more of a condemnation of those films yet again or a compliment to Red One. But I had a decent enough time with this one. I thought the premise was interesting, where you have Santa that gets kidnapped and you have the lead elf played by The Rock, who's like a Secret Service agent that has to team up with Captain America to go and hunt down Santa. Like, that's a fun holiday movie, family movie premise. I think that some of the CGI monsters, like the abominable snowman and stuff like that, were done pretty well. I'm pretty sure that Krampus was mostly practical, and I thought that he looked really good as well. There's some funny-ish moments. Like, it's a movie that I could watch with my family, watch with my kids, have a decent enough time with it, and not feel like I wasted my time. You know, an analogy that I made in my review is that for me, the good to great holiday films there's two categories. There's the must-watches, which are like the Christmas Vacations, the Santa Claus, the Home Alone 1 and 2s, and then you have the good Christmas movies that are like some of the Disney Channel original movies and I'll Be Home for Christmas and movies like Red One that I'm not going to feel obligated to rewatch them every single holiday season, but every couple of years, if we throw it on, if my kids throw it on, or if I just throw it on, I'll have a decent enough time revisiting it. So Red One, I thought it was a bit unfairly shit on, while having some genuine reasons to be concerned about this as just a representation of an issue in Hollywood. So if you were scared away from it, I can't imagine it's going to be long before it's on VOD. Check it out, watch it with the family. I guarantee you'll have at least a decent time with it. Coming at number 6 is actually a film that is a month late, but I completely forgot to add this on my October ranking for some reason, and it's a film called Monster Summer. And this is a movie I walked into purely out of curiosity. I did not see it advertised. I did not see anybody talking about it. I didn't see anybody doing reviews for it. So usually that tells me it must not be very good, but I was curious enough and had a free afternoon that I watched this, and it was actually pretty good. Like, this is a movie that I very much would enjoy watching with my kids. It reminded me a lot of movies and even some television series from the 90s. So it kind of had this nostalgic element to it, even though it's a new film. It's very much in the vein of things like Stranger Things, where you have a group of kids that think that something supernatural is going on in their town, and essentially they think a witch is taking over their town. And you have Mel Gibson, who honestly is probably the reason why they didn't advertise it, unfortunately, playing this old grizzled cop that is kind of like the grumpy old man that nobody really wants to talk to in the neighborhood, that actually teams up with these kids to try to solve what is going on because he believes it. And it was fun. It was a movie that I would have loved as a kid. You know, as an adult, I thought it was good. I would want to buy this and watch it with my kids or check it out on VOD. And there was some good, funny moments. I think that it was a good balance of having this family-friendly tone while also having some genuine, like, creepy stuff going on, akin to, like, Goosebumps or Are You Afraid of the Dark? I think the ultimate reveals by the third act were really fun and especially a treat for 90s kids like myself. And I thought Mel Gibson was really fucking good in it. Really fucking good, which, say what you will about Mel Gibson, I know people have very passionate views on him, and they view him as a guy who can never be forgiven, no matter what he does. Not even going to get into that debate, but as an actor, he has always been awesome, and I think this is actually one of the better performances he's given in his recent string of movies where you only see him like every 3 or 4 years. So I would recommend checking this one out. Obviously, spooky season is kind of behind us, although freaks like me, it's never completely behind us. It's always in our hearts. So check it out. It is on VOD right now. It was pretty damn good. Coming at number 5 is going to be Juror number 2, which is the latest, and many are speculating the final film directed by Clint Eastwood. And it was a movie that really didn't get much advertisement, didn't really get much buzz behind it. It was kind of just quietly dropped out there. And so I went to go check this out in a double feature with Red One, actually, out of curiosity. And, you know, it's a really solid drama. I don't think that it's amazing. You know, I don't think it's one of those movies that's like, you must go check this out. But if you like what Clint Eastwood movies typically are from his directorial efforts, if you like courtroom dramas, if the premise of this sounded interesting to you, I think most people will enjoy it. Basically, what you have here is Nicholas Hoult gets called for jury duty, and he gets selected to be juror number 2 on this murder trial, where this guy's girlfriend went down this dark road after they had a fight in a bar and then turned up dead. And he's on trial as being the one accused of murdering her. And this is not a spoiler. This is the entire setup of the film. This is all in the first 15 minutes of the movie. After hearing the first accounts of what exactly the trial is going to be that he is sitting on, Nicholas Hoult starts to realize that he was at the bar the night that this happened, and he left very upset, and it was dark and it was raining, and remembers hitting something that he thought it was a deer. And so he's in a situation where he thinks that he might actually be the one who is guilty for the crime that this man that he is a juror on his trial for is being accused of. And so the whole movie is Nicholas Hoult kind of having this battle of conscience where he is trying to piece things together for himself. He's also trying to kind of keep the jury at bay, very akin to 12 Angry Men, where they all pretty much in unison think that he's guilty. And he's like, well, I don't know. Let's talk about this a little bit more, because he does not want to condemn this man for something that maybe he's not guilty of. And you've got a great cast in here. You've got J.K. Simmons as a retired cop on the jury. You've got Toni Collette as the prosecuting attorney, the DA. And it's a really great premise that is done far too subtle and far too quiet for my liking. I still think that it's good by the end of it, but that premise, I just see a much more interesting version of that than what we got. I see something that's a lot more thrilling, that's got a bit more intensity to it, that there's a bit more of a ticking time element and a bit more of a nail-biting element to it. I'm like, is he guilty? Is he going to figure it out? Like, is he going to be able to keep everybody at bay? You think it's going to be a really tension-filled experience, and it's really not. It's very quiet. It's very dialogue-based. It's very monotone with its approach. Some people have loved that. Some people I've talked to about this film are like, that's what Clint Eastwood wanted to do, and that's what I like. It's kind of more like old-school movies, and it doesn't need to be flashy, I guess, but I just think it would be a better, more interesting movie if it had a little bit more of that punch to it. So I appreciate what they did here. I think that the acting's great. I think that the overall message that the movie's going for in regard to, owning up to guilt and taking responsibility, as well as even more so the focus of just like the very deliberate failures of the justice system. Like multiple times throughout the movie, you have people that acknowledge how shitty of a system it is. This selecting jurors and making them stay there, and they can't go home. They can't talk to people. They can't go to work until they either acquit or condemn this person, which I've always said I would be terrified to be on a trial that's a jury trial, because like how many people are actually going to look at the case and how many people just want to get the fuck out of there. And so they're just going to say whatever the majority is to get it done. There's multiple points in the film where you have somebody says something to the effect of, it's not a perfect system, but it's the only one we got. So the fact that the film commentates on that, I think, was profound. But as a movie, I think there was a better version of this. It isn't quite the version that we got. Coming in at number 4 is going to be Gladiator 2. Now, I really didn't know what to expect from this. The original Gladiator is a masterpiece in my mind. I've never understood the desire to make a sequel. They've rumored this, and Ridley Scott has talked about it for well over a decade now. And so a sequel to a movie that doesn't really need a sequel. Sometimes that works out. Sometimes there's a reason why we always thought it never needed a sequel. And this is somewhere between that, where it's not as bad as I feared that it could be, but it's not nearly as good as I hoped that it would be. I was definitely entertained. I can't lie. I think that the action sequences are good. I think that a lot of the characters are entertaining, especially Denzel Washington, even though he kind of feels like he's in a different film. I like the epic scale of it. It's a little bit more, well, it's a lot a bit more of a CGI fest than the first film is. You got like CGI animals and everything that's over the top and ridiculous, but still kind of dumb fun to watch. But narratively, it follows way too much the template of the first film for too much of the film. Like, it eventually does go in some different directions, but the majority of the runtime, it's like, oh, so this is kind of like Gladiator again. And I just don't think I want a shut your brain off kind of dumb fun action experience as a canonical sequel to Gladiator. I just think that movie's worth more than that. And then you got Ridley Scott already talking about there's definitely going to be a Gladiator 3, and it's like, come on, man, know when to say no, fuck. So I dug it enough, but I would not argue with anybody that said that it's awful in comparison and that it's just ridiculous that this thing exists. Part of me definitely agrees with that. Nor would I agree with somebody that said, hey, I had a great fucking time with it. I thought that it was fun. So logic be damned. I enjoyed it. Wouldn't argue with that either. It's worth checking out. It's not really worthy of the Gladiator name, in my opinion. Coming in at number 3 is going to be Wicked. This is a movie that was certainly not on my most anticipated, although it was on a lot of other people's. I'm not really a musical guy, not really a Wizard of Oz guy either. I've never seen the Broadway play. I didn't even know what the story of this was. And I took my wife and my 2 daughters to go see this a couple of nights ago. And while I still would say it's not really my thing, and I definitely was falling asleep in a couple of spots, I don't know if that's necessarily a reflection on the movie or the fact that I saw it on a weekend where I was busting my ass in my garage, building shelves and rearranging things. But not really a movie for me that I can still fully appreciate the fact that it is extremely well done. The musical numbers are very well done. The vocal talent of both of the two leads are pretty incredible. The story that they're going for here, certainly intriguing. You know, I'm, again, never really been a massive Wizard of Oz fan, but kind of going back and telling some origin story for the relationship between Glinda and the Wicked Witch of the West and everything. Okay, interesting enough. And I can't lie, when the movie ended, I was like, damn, I kind of wish I could watch part 2 now, because you end on a spot where I'm really curious where things are going to go. So I could totally understand why people that this is their thing, why they're going nuts about it, why this is going to be a big cultural phenomenon for December, why the theaters have been packed the fuck out, which is very cool to see, by the way. And inevitably probably going to be one of the highest grossing movies of the year, and probably going to walk away with some Oscars. And I think it's all very well deserved. My only issues with the film, aside from the fact that it's almost 3 hours long, and that's a lot to ask of anybody who's not a big musical fan, is that I'm a little bit puzzled at some aspects of the story, which admittedly might be cleared up when I watch part 2. So Wizard of Oz, one of the more iconic classic films ever. Wicked Witch of the West, one of the more classic movie villains ever. And this movie is essentially telling the story about how the Wicked Witch of the West is actually the misunderstood hero, and pretty much everybody else in Oz who is more the heroic characters, or at least not the villains in the original Wizard of Oz, are all assholes. And I found it very off-putting that the movie opens up with like a whole 10-minute sequence, musical numbers and everything, of all these characters like celebrating the death of the Wicked Witch of the West. This movie takes place like literally right after she gets melted with the bucket of water. And then the rest of the film is about how she's actually this really great person that's misunderstood, and everybody else is kind of the morally corrupt assholes. And so by the time the movie ended, I'm like, well, fuck, maybe there's going to be something happening in the second half that's going to switch this around. Maybe there's going to be some irredeemable things done by Elphaba, the Wicked Witch of the West. Maybe there's going to be some morally corrupt things that are going to be unforgivable done by the Wicked Witch of the West that's going to change my perspective in the second half. But when the movie ends, I'm looking back and I'm like, I feel kind of like dirty about this story. Like, everybody was so jovial. Even Glinda, like, she's dead. Isn't it great? She's dead. And then you go through another 2 hours and 30 minutes saying like, oh, wow, she's a great person that is doing the right thing, and all of you fucked her over. I don't know how to feel about this. So, you know, I haven't read on Wikipedia like how the rest of the story of Wicked goes. I'd rather see it in the movie. But if anything, maybe just put down in the comment section like, hey, it'll make more sense in part 2. You know, don't tell me specifically why, but I'm sure maybe there will be. But just having the experience of the first half, I found that to be very dark and off-putting. And now coming in at my top 2 are 2 films that are inevitably going to be fighting in my top 5 of the year. And you have number 2, which is Anora. And both of these films I saw at Fantastic Fest this year. Now, Anora is a film that somewhat was on my radar. I had heard a lot of people talking its praise, and I'd seen the posters and stuff. I didn't really know much about it. And then it premiered at Fantastic Fest, so we figured, we'll go check this thing out. It won the Palme d'Or or whatever? I'm sure I'm mispronouncing that, at Cannes. And what the story essentially was that was on the little synopsis on our pamphlet was a Cinderella story for sex workers. And so that seemed intriguing for sure. And basically what this is you have Anora, played by Mikey Madison, who you'll recognize from Scream 5 and Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And she's playing a stripper and a sex worker who starts spending a lot of time with this rich Russian kid. And they eventually get married for just young, spontaneous, ridiculous, rich lifestyle. It's kind of like lifestyle porn in the first hour or so. And so once she becomes married, it's like it feels like it's going to be this non-conventional love story. And then it immediately changes tone and goes in a very different direction where this kid's family, this Russian kid's family, which they never say specifically, but has some sort of like powerful mob ties or something, finds out about this marriage and sends some goons to come and force them to have an annulment. And when they get there, the husband takes off. And so the whole second act and third act of this film is Anora stuck with these Russian goons as they hunt down her newlywed husband. And it is fucking hilarious. I did not expect this movie to even be a comedy, but it is one of the funniest movies I've seen in a very long time. The crowd that I saw it with at Fantastic Fest, we were all dying of laughter over and over and over again. It's just a very smart sense of humor that the movie has. It's not like sight gags. It's not raunch humor. It's just dialogue, situational humor, some physical humor. It's just so well written. And yet the movie finds a way to still have like this emotional core and end in a way that's kind of like this melancholy gut punch in a lot of ways. So absolutely a surprise for me. I did not expect that Anora, of all movies, especially at Fantastic Fest, was going to be one of my favorite films of the festival and of the year, but I absolutely loved this movie. So please check it out if you can. But coming in at number 1 was my favorite film of Fantastic Fest and will definitely be at the top of my list of 2024, and that is Heretic. Now, this is a movie that certainly intrigued me. It was certainly one that I was curious about. The trailer was great, but I was not expecting to love it as much as I did. You have Hugh Grant here, who is playing this man who these 2 Mormon missionaries come to his house to give him more information about their religion. And essentially he locks them into the house and puts them through this mind game where he tests their faith. He gives them these lectures and he gives them these like real world factual examples of where religion came from and where Mormonism came from and everything else to try to shake their faith. And they progress through the game by choosing whether or not they still believe or they're starting to have their beliefs shaken. And it's just a great premise led by an incredible performance by Hugh Grant. And the 2 Mormon girls are very good as well. But Hugh Grant absolutely steals the show here. I want to see him do more horror. But what I love the most about this movie is that I'm somebody who absolutely loves religious horror when it's done well and it's done very smart. That's just a rarity. And when I say religious horror, most times when we get a religious horror film, it's just demonic possession and exorcist stuff, which doesn't really impress me much. But movies like Frailty, one of my favorite films of all time, this is kind of cut from that cloth where all of the horror and the tension and the uneasiness is through conversation and dialogue and ideologies and making you think and challenging certain beliefs. And what I loved is that they were able to do all of that so effectively without ever slipping into sacrilege, because this movie puts just as much power into Hugh Grant's ideology and his mission to shake these girls' faith and all of his examples and all of his justification for all of that, as it does putting power into the power of faith and the power of God. And it's a movie that ends on a note where it pretty much leaves that to you. It lets you take away from this whatever you will. It's not a movie that takes a side. You know, it's not a movie written by an atheist where he's trying to get his ideas out through the Hugh Grant character or anything like that. It's just a movie that presents this challenging situation and gives power to both sides and lets you take away from it what you will in a way that is very interesting as a conversation piece and also something that is not going to immediately offend or turn off people who are genuinely religious, especially if they're Mormon. So that's what I loved about this. So this is a movie that really surprised me how much I loved it and ended up being a film that when I reviewed it, like I really struggled not giving it a 5 out of 5. There's just a couple of things that were revealed in the third act that I need a little bit more information for. I've yet to watch it a second time. Maybe a rewatch will fix that. But when it gets a little bit more fantastical and out there by the third act, I think it loses a little bit of that very grounded nature that I love so much about it. So it wasn't completely a perfect film, but damn close. Absolutely loved it. And it was my number 1 film of November. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2024 new release reviews. I'm also going to put a playlist up here of all of my month wrap-ups for the year so far. We got one more left, so please stick around for all of that by liking, sharing, and hitting that subscribe button. And as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.